So welcome everyone to End Emotional Eating, a journey to freedom. I'm so excited to have you here because for me, this has been such a sore topic for me. Emotional eating was such a huge part of my life, and I understand how difficult it is when we have this, vision to stay healthy, eat healthy, but there's always just this emotional factor that keeps coming in the way. Or maybe you're here because you feel like you don't understand why you just can't stop eating certain times. Even when you're full, you just carry on. So today's webinar is just going to help you, first of all, identify whether your eating actually comes from hunger or emotions, and then what to do about it. Because I feel like, often we're not sure. And so I wanted to really give you clarity today on that. So I'm pretty excited about this. So how this session is going to work is we'll cover a little bit about me, my journey, and then we will hop straight into the content. First off, we will identify what emotional eating is and how to identify it. And then we'll move through my 3-step process to end emotional eating. And afterwards, I have a special gift for you valued at $400. And then we'll also have just a Q&A session afterwards. If you have any questions, please write them down now and we can go through them at the end. I would love for you to just be in a space where you can concentrate on this content, make sure that you fully absorbed in what's going on. So maybe switching off all other distractions, your mobile phone, all those kind of things, because we're here to learn about our health, but we're also here to learn about how to overcome something that's really been a pain for us. And we can only do that when we're 100% focused. So just make sure that you dedicate this time to go through this content. I'm going to try and keep everything as quick and understandable for you as possible so I don't bore you to tears. But I also just want to make sure that you almost see this time and training as a little bit of self-care. The way you invest in just attending this webinar or the replay is your way of dedicating and making that change. And that is always the first step, is to step into a space where you are saying yes to self. And by you just signing up to this webinar, for you attending, whether it's now live or a replay, means that you are saying yes to changing your relationship with emotional eating. And I just wanted to acknowledge you for that, because I feel like, often we just miss those kind of things. And yeah, I think this is a great place to start for that. So I hope you're ready, and we'll get straight into it. So my name is Estelle, and my friends call me Stell, just short for since uni. And I help women stop binge and emotional eating. I have been on this path of helping other women heal their relationship with food for the last 2 years now. It's pretty exciting. I just counted the months. And I was just like, oh my gosh, 2 years have gone by so quickly. It's been so rewarding. I had just hopped off a session with one of my clients, and she's like, Estelle, I don't know what you've done with me, but I'm just not even thinking about food anymore. Like, it's just like the most amazing feeling. And that is where I am so super glad that I can be in the space where I can help people feel that they're no longer consumed by food. But before we get hopped into any of the content or more what I do, I'm also a dog mom. I have a 7-year-old bull terrier, Kaiser. He is the love of our lives. And we just absolutely love him. He's such a character. So if you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, you will, and especially if I'm doing a yoga training or something like that, you will see him in my videos or my photos. I am also a yoga teacher, so I teach live yoga classes, but also since COVID-19, I was actually teaching a lot of online classes. up to date, I've been binge free for over 2 years now. And it's just such an amazing space to be in. I cannot tell you how amazed I felt the first time I had a week where I did not binge at all. And, you know, maybe binge eating is not quite your journey, but you are in the space where you just don't understand why you overeating at certain times, or you feel that loss of control when it comes to that birthday tea cake. And, you know, like for me, I just wanted to say, I understand where you're coming from. I struggled with food issues for over 13 years. Most of the time I was struggling with emotional eating. And then the last couple of years that worked into binge eating because of the fact that I was trying to control my life and my food and eating like more and more. And unfortunately that backfired into me actually having this unhealthy obsession with eating healthy. It's called orthorexia. And this actually led me to binge even more because of how restrictive I was leading my life and my relationship with food. So let's hop straight into what emotional eating is. So emotional eating is any time you really eat something when you're not hungry. And this can happen because of anything. So this is 100% normal. We all emotionally eat. So I don't want you to feel bad about that in the first place. But how this kind of comes about is we actually have this space where since we were babies, we were given food the minute we cried. And that was usually our parents just trying to eliminate, like going through a process of elimination. So they would first, almost one of the first things they would give us is food when we cried. However, you know, we at the time might not have been hungry, but we were feeling an emotion that we couldn't identify with. And the solution we were provided by our primary caregiver is food. And mostly back then it was in the form of milk. It's beautiful, comforting, warm. It just made us feel absolutely comforted. And then we kind of forget about the emotion that we were feeling because all of a sudden we have this comfort. So we go through life being comforted with food as we grow up, you know, so we like sometimes we rewarded if we finished our food plates, or you know, there could be times where you were rewarded with an ice cream if you did well on your report card. But we also start going through spaces where we get rewarded or we use food in celebrations. So when it's birthdays, you know, like so often you're at a birthday party, you might have had a beautiful dinner, and then all of a sudden you'll keep eating even though there's cake. You'll start eating the cake, and that's not because you're hungry, it's because you part of this celebration. So yeah, basically this is just such a beautiful space to be in, where we can understand that emotional eating happens and is normal. But if you are starting to lead into feeling guilty about emotional eating, if you're starting to lean into spaces where you just feel like this is just taking over your life, then this is where emotional eating becomes a problem. If you find yourself every night after dinner, you know, walking into the closet and, you know, eating that ice cream or eating whatever happens, then, you know, this is where we really start looking at, like, why has emotional eating become such a massive part of your life? So usually what happens is we have this trigger that causes us to emotionally eat. And that's usually something that makes us feel uncomfortable. And this can be anything. This could be you know, you feel alone, or you feel awkward, you know, like, so usually if you find yourself at the snack table at birthday parties or networking events or anything like that. It's probably because you're wanting that comfort of something, and you know food has helped provide you with comfort somewhere along the line. So this is where we start. We have this trigger that happens. For me, one of my biggest triggers was always loneliness. So my husband would travel for work, and I would be fine for the first 2 days, and then all of a sudden something will just happen and it will trigger a binge. So that's just how things kind of start, is with something that triggers you, whether it's an event or a habit or an emotion, or hunger. So I talk about this a lot in some of my other talks, where hunger is probably one of our biggest triggers. So we go through our day we forget to eat, or we've been too restrictive, and then we get this trigger. Our body's going through overwhelm or anxiety because we haven't eaten, and then all we can think about is eat. So next what happens is we've got this trigger that happens. I'm going to use loneliness for an example, or boredom. So we feel lonely, and then all of a sudden we can't sit with that feeling. It's uncomfortable. And that's when an urge will pop up. Now, an urge can be, usually it's in thought, but it can also be a sensation that you feel in your body. So how this usually presents is a thought that comes up and goes, you know what, it might not say I'm lonely, because it won't identify with that. It will just go, you know what, you deserve that chocolate in the cupboard because, you know, you've been good all week. And I think you will just really, this will really benefit you right now. And that is how the urge starts. And then as we lean into that, you know, like there's something that listens to it. And as we give that a little bit of attention, the thoughts start becoming louder and louder. Now, sometimes an urge is not a thought. Sometimes the urge is just a habit. So the habit could be that you've come from a place where every day at 3 o'clock you have a chocolate. And eventually your body becomes dependent, and your mind becomes so dependent on the comfort you get from that piece of chocolate at 3 p.m. that you actually, that becomes the urge. It's like, oh, it's 3 o'clock, time for my chocolate, if that makes sense. Other forms of urge can also be in sensations. So for me, sometimes an urge will actually show up in my throat or my mouth as either extra saliva, or actually my jaw would clench quite a bit back in the day, especially if I was starting to think about something that was forbidden on my food list. So then I'd get this real like achy feeling in my body, and that actually adds to the urgency of getting rid of that. And like my body knows out of habit or out of, you know, previous behavior, that's the only thing that's going to get me out of that uncomfortable feeling is to eat. And now you're in the space where all of a sudden your thoughts have overpowered you. All you want to do is get rid of that, and you want to hop into a space where you can just eat. And all of a sudden it almost feels like your brain switches off. You know, a lot of my clients talks about this, where they just feel like they can't, something just happens and they go into this like altered state. And this is where we tend to overeat, and this is where we tend to not realize that that full block of chocolate on my own is too rich and I'm feeling sick. You don't feel that in the moment because it's almost like your body distracts you, and that's all you zoned in on. And obviously, naturally, what happens afterwards, especially if you've just eaten the whole family block of chocolate, is we have this guilt that pops into our minds. And this is also our subconscious knows that we're going to feel guilty and she takes advantage of that. She rubs it in real hard because she knows that you are possibly going to be eating again because of the guilt, because the guilt then becomes a trigger. So it becomes this vicious circle where we actually wake up in the morning feeling guilty for what we've eaten last night. And that's all you can think about. And the next minute you have this urge and then you eat. Then you feel guilty again. So you try and make up for it with like thinking about, you know, you put in your calories into MyFitnessPal, or you, you know, obsess in the mind about how you're going to be good today and not eat any of those foods. And the next minute, you know, you're halfway down a whole pack of chips or like 2 donuts, and you're like, what happened? Like, I've just like lost 20 minutes of my life and it was while I was eating. So, you know, like one of my clients literally would wake up in the middle of the night. Actually, she wasn't really awake. She would wake up in the middle of the night in the kitchen where she has finished a whole box of squares or a whole box of chips or bickies or whatever. And she's like, I don't understand how this happens. I went to bed, and then like I wake up, and it's not like I woke up and walked to the kitchen. I wake up in the kitchen already having eaten all this food. And we had to really work hard on where that came from. And like one of her biggest triggers was hunger. She was, you know, she actually had another disorder, being very restrictive with her food intake. And this is what was causing her to subliminally or subconsciously eat in the middle of the night. So, and yeah, this is what can happen, you know? So just bearing this in mind when you think about emotional eating and how it can affect you. And all of a sudden when you think, oh, well, I'm emotionally eating again, I don't understand, I'm not feeling any emotion, it's probably just because of the previous guilt or whatever you felt before. So basically, where do we get these where does emotional eating come from, or what are the main triggers we need to look out for? Mainly, stress is one of the biggest things that cause emotional eating, whether you feel stressed on a conscious level or whether that's like deep down subconsciously. And basically we produce this stress hormone called cortisol, and cortisol actually stimulates cravings for foods that will give us energy. So cortisol is our fight or flight hormone, and that prepares the body for war or battle or attack from that, you know, ancient tiger back when we were in the like, you know, caveman days. And we are in a space where, you know, it just gets to a point where we are so bombarded with cortisol because our whole lives is in stress mode. We don't give ourselves the time to process what's happened to us during the day. We don't allow ourselves to feel emotions when they come up. Like, if you had to think really, when was the last time you actually allowed yourself to be okay with being bored without trying to distract yourself with either food or watching television, or, you know, when was the last time you were okay with actually just taking 5 to 10 minutes to do a stress relieving exercise? And most of the time those stress relieving exercises are very quiet, and it requires you to be with yourself, and that's uncomfortable for us. So we live in this world where we've created, like, we almost addicted now to stress. But what happens is the cortisol triggers cravings for especially salty and sweet foods. So these are normally the foods that you will feel guilty over after eating. The next thing is ignoring emotions, as I've just talked about. So we can do that in a couple of ways. Like, most of it is distraction techniques, where we either drink, or we, like in emotional eating perspective, we eat to avoid that emotion because we feel that's that quick bit of comfort. However, if you don't deal with what's going on for you with that emotion, our bodies are very clever. They're like, oh, okay, you don't have time to deal with this anger right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to store it somewhere for you in the body. And then later, when you are when you are a little bit alone or when you are bored, that's a perfect time for you to feel that feeling again, because now you have time for it. And that's why we often feel emotions in the body. Like you can feel it in your stomach, you can feel it in the throat, you can feel it in your heart. And the thing about emotions is it only takes about 90 seconds to 2 minutes to actually process an emotion and let it go. But if you don't, as I said, the body will store it for you for later. The same as it does with like excess food. You know, if we don't finish our plate of, or if we eat too much and the body's like, oh, hang on, what do I do with all this extra stuff? It stores it in the body, in the fat cells for later. Same with emotions. Like, it's not like it just disappears when we distract ourselves with silly things. Then boredom or feelings of emptiness. So boredom and loneliness and that space of emptiness is very uncomfortable. We don't like that because that kind of feels like in those times we almost have to deal with what we're feeling, but it just kind of makes us feel so uncomfortable that it will just be so much better to do something and distract ourselves. And the way to do that is through finding something to eat, you know. And that's probably some of the times when you'll find yourself in the refrigerator not knowing what you're doing there. You're like standing in the refrigerator staring blankly in there and you're like, Stell, what am I doing here? Has that happened to you? So, and that's where that comes from. And then obviously last one, like I talked about, is habits. So I mentioned this earlier, where you actually at 3 p.m. every day, you've had that chocolate for a week or two. It doesn't take long to form a eating habit. So a week or two of eating that sugar at 3 p.m., all of a sudden the body's like, yep, it's like 10 to 3, time for my chocolate. Like, where is it? And it's going to make you think about that chocolate until you have something sweet or to get through that craving. So basically, how do we identify whether our hunger or the eating that we're going through is actually emotional or physical? So first of all, we go through a space of understanding that there's going to be an urge, like we talked about, to eat. Sometimes, you know, we only think of urges as negative, but sometimes when you are hungry, those are all cues or urges to fulfill your hunger. It's not bad. It's just your body saying, hey, it's time for a meal. I need a snack. But there is definitely the difference between emotional and physical hunger. So physical hunger will come on slowly. So you might like feel like a couple of indications that, oh, you know, a snack could be good now, but then you kind of carry on with work and an hour later you're like, oh, okay, now it's really time. I'm going to get hangry if I don't go and, you know, prepare my salad or whatever you're doing. Whereas emotional hunger comes on so quick. It's like switches on and all of a sudden you are just in a space where it's like, oh my God, I just have to eat. And the second thing about emotional hunger is it's like, I need chocolates or I need that donut. That's like, I'm going to die if I don't have that donut. Like, that's how it feels. So it's very, very persuasive. It's non-negotiable on what you want to eat. Whereas physical hunger would be like, oh yeah, I can do with anything right now. Like, I can have an apple and that's actually a good test to check whether you're hungry, is like when those thoughts pop up, like, and it's like going into more of the emotional specs, is asking yourself, how about an apple? And if your body says, yes, I'll have an apple, then you know that's physical hunger. But if it's like, oh, hell no, I want that donut, then you know emotional eating is like that thought, that urge is an emotional one. Another way to tell that is, you know, physical hunger is felt in the stomach. Whereas emotional hunger all starts from here, because it's not really a real physical hunger. We're sitting in the brain space, and that's why, but it feels so urgent from the neck up. And that's why you'll get all these like kind of crunches in the jaw, or your mouth will just water excessively, like out of like for no reason. You might get a bit headachy, but also you'll have blinding thoughts of food all the time. And that's when you know. And also these thoughts are not like, oh, you know, you can go have like, how about we have a muffin later? It's not like that. It's like, oh my God, like seriously, Stell, like muffin right now, or something really bad is going to happen. So it's always going to try and convince you that you're going to die or something bad is going to happen if you don't have that specific food right now. And it knows you will react to that, because that's the reaction that we would normally react to. When we're in that space, we produce even more cortisol, bit of adrenaline, and it's like it gets us to move. So that's why this happens. So now, what keeps us in the overeating loop is, I just see that my little image is not working, but what keeps us in the overeating loop is this undeniable urge to eat, like I was telling you earlier about. And like this is obviously triggered by, as I said, hunger, emotions, and habits. And, you know, emotional eating and habitual eating goes very, very well together. So basically, I basically name this urge a food zombie. And how I came about this was the fact that I felt so overpowered by my food thoughts, and so out of control when these thoughts would come through. And you know, for me, it was like my brain would switch off and these things will just start happening. And the more I spoke to my clients and on market research calls with beautiful women who were like willing to share their journeys with me, they all said the same thing. It's like I'm being possessed by something, and like they all have a different name for it. Like some called it a demon. And so for me, it was just like, I felt like I was a zombie being taken over. Like there's no like thought about things. I'm just like acting out of, without remorse almost. So who are these food zombies? If you haven't been part of my newsletter or anything like that, you will probably just not know who I'm talking about, but I normally mention them quite often. And I'm so sad that my images are not working. But the first food zombie that I normally mention is Anxious Annie, and she's a stress eater. She's really good when it comes to food and her workout plans, but the minute some stressful situation comes on, or when her day gets derailed, she needs to go for that chocolate. And that's when she feels completely out of control, and she can't, like, she just feels she can't trust herself around any form of foods. So she blames food for what happens, but in actual fact, it's her anxiety that actually triggers her to eat. So she's really an emotional trigger. Next, we have Late Night Lizzy, and Late Night Lizzy is that habitual 3 p.m. kind of lady who, or anything from 3 or up until late in the evenings. And she basically either has a 3 p.m. fix, or when she gets home from work, she just does not stop eating, and she can't find herself out of that. She just feels so out of control in that space, and she just doesn't understand, because she's good during the day. She really tries her best, but like at nighttime, she just feels like she just like self-sabotages all the time. So, and she thinks like there's definitely something wrong with her in the fact that she just can't control herself around food. Next, we have Possessed Patsy. Now, Possessed Patsy really represents herself in these urges that we feel. So she really gets into the space of food thoughts all the time. She starts up in the morning, waking up, thinking about food or how she's going to be better today when it comes to food. And that's how her day starts. And all she can see at her desk when she's sitting at work is like pastries floating around her face. And like, this was me, like, to be honest, like, this is what would happen to me is I would restrict myself so much, but I would start thinking about how I'm going to be good today, that by like 10 o'clock in the morning, all I could literally almost see floating past my face was donuts, like, or pastries, because I just felt like, yeah. And it was weird. I was like, why is this happening to me? Next, we have Wagon Wonder, and she's the self-saboteur. So she is good for a long time, and you'll see this when you've been on many diets. You are so amazing at, you know, I don't know, counting your calories and showing up for your weigh-ins or whatever you're doing. And all of a sudden there's a party, and then all of, like, you know, you have one piece of cake, and then all of a sudden the next minute, you know, you've completely derailed. 4 weeks later, you're like, oh my gosh, I need to get back onto that eating plan of mine. And then it's really hard to start again. So Wagon Wonder is really black and white. So she's like, well, you know, she's the one that's going to tell you, well, you've already cheated today, you might as well have the whole chocolates. Or, you know, you've already had one donut, you might as well have another one. Or you've opened the packet of Tim Tams, you might as well finish them all. And then we have Counting Cassie, and this is where I basically sat very much towards the peak of my binge eating disorder. And this is where I was completely obsessed with what food I was putting in my mouth. So it had to be tox-free, organic. It had to be dairy-free, calorie-free, and I don't know, everything just had to be like 100% perfect. And I had to make it myself. I wouldn't eat anything. If I went to a restaurant, I wouldn't go to just any restaurant. It would have to be an organic place where sometimes I'd even ask them how they've prepared their food, or, you know, how they've washed their food. So it became this scenario where I was so obsessed with being like eating so clean and so pure. And what that did was, like, it restricted me to very little foods. And obviously in doing that also, I wasn't eating at normal restaurants, or I wasn't eating morning tea cake if it was someone's birthday. And what that did is that set off my deprivation and led me to a space where, you know, I would just binge for weeks on end. So, and then we get the last one is basically Recovery Roxy is her name. And this is where I take my clients. So they understand where their cravings are coming from. They understand their triggers and their urges. They are able to basically, the minute an urge comes on, they are able to break out of that. They have been taught techniques to mindfully indulge so that they can still have that piece of cake without any guilt, without feeling like they have to go back and eat the whole cake. You know, food is not a thought for them anymore. Like, they only think about food when it's time to eat. It's like, oh, okay, it's lunchtime, let's go. And that's about it, you know? And that is like a really good space to be in. So they get all the food groups in because they want to nourish their bodies, and their bodies actually crave that because they have not been depriving themselves of all foods. They are able to have all foods and feel amazing about every now and then also still having, you know, cheat meals or whatever the case is. So basically, how do we end emotional eating then? So as I said before, emotional eating will always be there in a healthy dose. We always, like, there are times when we emotionally eat, and that could be like the times when we do have that birthday cake with our friends. And by all means, go and enjoy that birthday cake, because it's a form of celebration. It's a beautiful day, you know. But if you're there at the birthday party and all you can think about it since you arrived is whether I'm going to eat that cake and whether I'll just have one piece. No, maybe I shouldn't have it all, because what if I have some more? And then, like, how much time are you spending enjoying your friend's birthday? How much time are you actually spending with connecting to your friends? Because I probably would think that not so much, because you're in the brain space and you obsessively trying to avoid that piece of cake. And so that's when you know that there's something wrong with this form of emotional eating. And this is where you can start applying this 3-step process. So the first one is start rejecting food rules. And what I mean about food rules is the fact that people and health gurus and the world have told us how to eat, when to eat, what to avoid, what never to touch. And every week it changes, you know, eggs are in, eggs are out, broccoli is the new thing. And then all of a sudden, oh no, like, you know, so we really are in a space where we're so confused. We don't know what to do or where to turn to when it comes to food advice, because like there's just so much out there. And we've also started putting our own food rules in. Like if I had to ask you about what your thoughts are on sugar, you'll probably have like 5 to 10 rules about sugar. So like, don't eat sugar in the morning, only eat it at night, don't eat sugar at night, only eat 3 teaspoons of sugar a day, don't eat fruit because it has sugar. Like I can ramble on, and you will probably have loads more yourself. So just feel that energy when I just started rambling off these rules about one food, how your body started reacting to those rules, and like how it almost felt forbidden just even saying the word sugar. So what we want to do is start moving away from that and move into a space where we start nourishing our bodies the right way, starting in the morning, making sure that we always nourish our bodies with foods that are going to give us the most energy, so that we feel sustainable. We have energy. We have energy to, first of all, cope with our work lives, but we also have energy to come home in the evenings and play with the kids and help them with their homework. And I don't know, still attend all those societies that you've got going on the side, and still have time for the gym, all those things you want to do. Like, we want to make sure that the food we eat is the food that actually gives us that energy to do so we can live our lives to the fullest. And if you are cutting out sugar and you are just living on carrots and celery, unfortunately, you're not going to have that energy. You're not going to be able to go through life like being all those things that you want to be. So like, really start thinking about what foods provide you with that energy and start adding more of that in. Second of all is never go hungry. Like, seriously, plan out your day so that you have snacks on the ready, your lunches are planned. If this means meal prep on once a week on a Sunday, then go for it, because hunger is also, as I said, one of the big triggers of even emotional eating, because we don't feel comfortable being in that hunger space. Next is stopping when you're full. So I understand that this is really hard for most people, because we are in the space where we've restricted ourselves or we forget to eat. And then all of a sudden we get this plate of food and we just like start eating, and we finish that bowl. We might even go for seconds, and it's like, oh my gosh, how did I do this? How did I get so far into eating all this food when I'm actually feeling so sick right now? And the reason why we get to a space where we don't recognize when we're full in the moment is A, because of deprivation, B, because we have basically ignored our hunger. And when we do that, like, okay, so let me take a step back. When the body starts feeling hunger, it produces a hormone called ghrelin, and ghrelin tells the brain, hey, it's time to start looking for food. But what we do is we ignore that signal from the body. Because why? Because there's a food rule that says you can only eat at 7 o'clock, and then you can only eat again at 1 o'clock, or whatever the case is. So we ignore that whole system. And what happens is ghrelin builds up and builds up and builds up. And all of a sudden it triggers this emergency peptide called neuropeptide Y. And this peptide actually starts boosting cravings for carbohydrates and sugar, because it thinks, oh, we're going into low energy here. I need to recuperate, and carbohydrates and sugary foods is going to give me that hit. So while we're doing that, neuropeptide Y suppresses, and ghrelin suppresses our fullness hormone, which tells us, hey, I'm full. So we can't hear that when we have high levels of neuropeptide Y and ghrelin in the system. So we're sitting down with this food, we've been deprived, and we've had this space where we haven't eaten pasta in 2 years, and all of a sudden we have this massive bowl. The body can't understand when we're full, because it's like we've taught it to ignore all our internal signals, which is the hunger and the fullness and energy. So this is probably one of the biggest strategies. If you can get this right, you will be so well on your way. Next is mindfulness. So we don't realize when we feel an emotion mostly, because we get into a space where we just carry on with our day. Nothing kind of matters. We're women, we expect it to be superwoman, and nothing really needs to, like, everything just needs to like fall off our back, like, you know, it didn't really happen. Meanwhile, things really upset us, you know. That guy who cuts us off in the traffic has really upset us because it gave us a massive fright. Meanwhile, we just like, oh, well, you know, that's just happened to me and I'll just carry on with the rest of my day. Unfortunately, what that does is later in the afternoon, you might all of a sudden have this uncontrollable craving for sugar, because the body's like, oh my gosh, that actually happened. And I was actually scared. So like, and this happens to us all day. Even that stress of sending out that email late to whoever, or, you know, getting that project done in time, or picking the kids up in time, all those things are triggering. And if we don't sit and really like decompress through that, then we're going to be in a space where emotional eating will just be such a natural thing for us, because we're going to need that calmness. So how do we do mindfulness? Like, first of all, we're moving away from that food thought we have first thing in the morning that said, you know, Estelle, yesterday you were bad, so today you have to eat really clean. So we want to shift that mindset into how we want to feel in the day. So energizing your mind with how you want to start your day. And I actually like call this crafting your day, or crafting your intention for the day about how you want to feel. And no one wants to feel crap like at the end of the day. No one does. So if you start mentally instilling in the morning that I want to feel amazing the whole day, then that will start happening, you know, because the minute you put that intention out there throughout the day, you are going to take little action steps that's going to get you there. Next is emotional healing. So what do I mean with that? That's where I was talking about us ignoring our emotions and how it gets stored like in different parts of the body or the brain or wherever the body will find a space, you know. And for us to move through that, we need to allow ourselves time to sit in that uncomfortable space and deal with our emotions and deal with the triggers. And maybe you can't do that while you're working, but then making a concerted effort to start doing that when you get home in the evenings or first thing in the morning. Get rid of all that old clutter that might have come through while you're sleeping. And then managing anxiety around food. You know, if you've been putting this like big bad wolf, sugar's addictive kind of thing, you know, rules around food, all of a sudden when you're around it, your body gets anxious and you can't sit still, but you want to look at it, but you don't. And it really causes so much turmoil in the body. Obviously managing your stress levels also, like such a big one, because that actually cortisol brings on sugar cravings as well. So lifestyle habits is next. So that's the third step. So moving into intuitive movement. So moving your body for energy and not weight loss. And what I mean with that is not like, okay, dedicate 4 hours to the gym in the evenings when you get home from work and that's what you're going to do. No, because your body is a fluid kind of vessel and it wants to move all the time. So you need to bring in movements during the day. If that, like that could be, and I'm not saying, okay, take 5 hours during the day and slot like a gym session in every hour or two. What that means is get up from your desk every half an hour to 45 minutes, do a bit of a stretch, get your neck looking in a different area, because otherwise everything becomes stagnant. And if the body becomes stagnant, the muscle sees, and that means stress. Stress means cravings. So you want to move your body the whole day. You can dedicate smaller amounts of time then later in the evening for a longer workout or something like that. So really honoring that space where you can move intuitively. Relaxing. Giving yourself the permission to just take 30 minutes a day to unwind and decompress. And again, you don't have to do this once. It's actually more beneficial if you stole little bits out of your day to help you move through this. So you can do this with like starting in the morning with a little 5 to 10 minute mindfulness practice. It doesn't have to be a full on, meditation session, anything that really brings you into a relaxed state. And then throughout the day, adding those little things in. There's so many little mindfulness apps and relaxation apps, things that you can go and do. But even just if you just half an hour during the day or after work or even in your lunch break, go for a nice soothing walk. Like just don't listen to music at that time. Just give yourself that time to be with yourself and ask, what do I need to process? And let that move through you. The other thing is managing your planning for success. And we're all busy. Like none of us have, like I have not met one person through many careers, whether you're a working mom or full-time businesswoman, whatever the case is, all of us have so much to fill up our day. And we need to start thinking cleverly about how we manage our time. So planning is such a big one. And maybe that's once a week, you plan your whole week. You take out all the things that are not necessarily to action items. Maybe that's the time when you actually do your grocery shopping and you cook all your meals for the week, or at least prep all the veggies and everything so that by the time you actually cook something, it's a quick process. Planning for days where you know you're going to be extremely stressed out. How can you support yourself in those situations? So like these are just the little things that you can do to start bringing into your lifestyle habits. And please note how not once I said stop eating sugar or carbohydrates, like because that is not going to help you overcome mindless overeating. These are the things that will help you do that. So what next? So we're in a space where obviously, most of the people who work with me, the women who work with me, they come onto the Food Freedom program with me. And basically what we work through is how to trust yourself around food and not start your day thinking about food. And that's all you can think about. And as I mentioned, my example with my clients today, where she's like, I don't know what you've done, but like, I haven't thought of food all day. So that's just so amazing. Number 2 is having mental space. And that only happens when we can shut up the food thoughts. And the minute you have more mental space, you can be more present with your loved ones. You can take on new initiatives. You can, like one of my clients have gone back to school because she just feels like, well, now I have the time, I have the energy because I'm not mentally exhausted by constantly thinking of food or guilt from eating. So understanding your fullness. So as I mentioned, we have been conditioning our bodies to not hear when our bodies are full. And obviously most women, when I speak to them, their biggest thing is they just want to actually stop when they're full, or have a piece of cake and then be satisfied. And that's what we do through that. Stopping overeating. So getting rid of binge or emotional eating is one of the things that our core focus when I work with women in my space, because, you know, you can go to anyone for weight loss, you know, and it might work for you for a couple of weeks, but then guaranteed you'll be back emotional eating because you haven't dealt with the issues that are actually causing your eating and the overeating. You know, it's easy to come up with a quick fix plan that's going to help us lose those centimeters, but then, you know, two years later, guaranteed you have either put all that back or probably sometimes a lot more. So we work through actually dealing with the root cause of what causes the binge and overeating, and that's different for every single person. And then lastly, you know, I want to be in a space where you like have this balanced life when it comes to food, where you are not afraid to walk past the sweet aisle and, like, you know, completely avoid it, where you happily have a piece of cake or a donut every now and then because that's part of a balanced life, and not living in fear of food. So that's, you know, what I do with my clients on in the Food Freedom Program. So this is really for you if you're constantly thinking about food and you feel possessed over food, like possessed Patsy. You're starting to stop eating. You don't know where that boundary is. You feel like you're spiraling out of control. You're just always anxious that you're going to blow your diet, or you're just anxious around food all the time, or just anxious in general, and this leads you to eat. The other thing is, you know, you just feel like you keep falling into the space of self-sabotage, and you're just so frustrated because every time you take 2 steps forward, it's like one little slip and you've like ruined everything. And then also another big thing for you is like eating out of boredom or loneliness is just something that you just like, that's just what you do. You turn on the television and then you eat. And the thing is with, you know, like watching TV, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you are constantly eating in front of the television and that's bugging you, and the reason for that is we think that TV is something that just basically helps us not feel bored. But it's not really. In effect, watching television is a distraction from feeling bored. So the boredom feeling is still there. So I teach you how to actually deal with the boredom and let that pass, so you can just watch TV for the fun of it, not having to use it as a distraction tool. So what do you get in the 12-week program with me? This is basically 12 weeks where we meet one-on-one on the phone, usually via Zoom, because I prefer to record sessions, and my clients find this so helpful because they have those sessions for life. And basically, I give you those recordings straight after our session, but you also have in-between support from a perspective of an app called Voxer, which is like pretty much just a chat app, but you can record like long, lengthy messages. So you're not limited to a minute, like on some like Facebook Messenger. So what you'll do in between sessions is you will basically message me the minute you have this urge to binge, and I will support you through this process. You also get my signature stop method, which is my foolproof signature stop protocol, which is like absolutely phenomenal. When I put people through this, they just can't believe at the end of the day how much that makes sense to them. You also get lifetime access to all the documents that I give to you, all the resources that you're going to need. And as and when I update those, you will have access to that as well. So this is an evergreen piece whenever you need to go back to that, you will have that. And then lastly, basically we start transforming your relationship with food, because that's the most important thing. You know, I can give you all these like calls and everything, but for me, it's really more important that you are able to deal with your triggers, that you can start understanding your emotional eating, you can deal with emotional eating so that it never is an issue anymore. You know how to deal with your emotions without eating. You know how to go throughout your day without thinking about food. You know how to mindfully indulge when you do actually eat that beautiful piece of cake. And I keep repeating the cake thing, but that was one of the biggest things I feared ever was, you know, eating a piece of cake, because I just felt like I could never stop once I started. So, and then dealing with all types of hunger, whether this is emotional or physical or just whatever gets into your way. So that is just a little bit about my food freedom program. But today I am not really selling that to you. I just wanted to give you an idea of what is possible when you start working with me and how I can help you. But for today, I just wanted to give you some information and also offer you a free food freedom planning session worth over $400, where the two of us sit and we actually come up with a plan for you to end emotional eating. So if you would like to take part in that, what I'll do is I will be sending out the link to that after this video. But and now it's time for questions and answers. Any questions, anyone? Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining, and I can't wait to hear more about you and see you more in my community. So join my Facebook group, Food Freedom for Binge and Emotional Eaters. I'm on Instagram as Wholesome Lifestyle Project, and I can't wait for the next training. So I will see you guys all very soon. Thank you so much for joining.